Bear Stearns, bought out before Lehman even fell. Let's crack it open.
Monday, 18 billion in cash. Thursday, 2 billion. Friday, the central bank invoked emergency powers not used since the Great Depression. Sunday, the largest bank offered $2 a share for a company trading at $170 a year earlier. Employees who owned 30% of the stock saw $5 billion in value erased. 9 months earlier, 2 mortgage hedge funds had imploded. $1.6 billion gone. The fund managers were indicted, acquitted. Nobody was criminally convicted. The central bank's emergency facility purchased $30 billion in toxic assets. A decade later, it returned a $2.5 billion profit. The most toxic assets on Wall Street were worth more than anyone thought. 6 months after this firm was rescued, a competitor was allowed to fail. Academic research published afterward shows the central bank had the authority to rescue the competitor too. The decision not to was a choice that cost the global economy trillions. The firm was founded in 1923 and grew as a scrappy, aggressive trading house known for risk-taking and deep loyalty. When other Wall Street firms each contributed to a rescue fund in 1998 for a failing hedge fund, this firm refused. The chief executive said they had done nothing wrong and should not pay for others' mistakes. That decision was remembered and resented when the firm needed help a decade later. By 2007, it had roughly $400 billion in assets and 14,000 employees. It was the 5th largest investment bank. Its chief executive was known as a fierce competitor in both business and the card game bridge, which he played at an elite level. In June 2007, as 2 of his mortgage hedge funds were collapsing, he was at a bridge tournament in Nashville. He was reportedly difficult to reach during the critical days when fund managers were scrambling. The bridge tournament was not why the firm failed, but it became the symbol. The 2 funds had bet heavily on mortgage-backed securities rated AAA and AA. One used leverage of roughly 20 to 1. When the underlying mortgages deteriorated, the firm committed $3.2 billion of its own capital to bail out the funds. It failed. One fund recovered nothing, the other recovered roughly 9 cents on the dollar. $1.6 billion in investor capital gone. The fund managers were indicted for fraud. Emails showed one writing that the fund could be toast. Both were acquitted. If they could not be convicted, the path to holding any executive accountable was extremely narrow. But the firm's funding model made what came next inevitable. The firm funded roughly 85 to 90% of its assets through overnight borrowing, approximately $70 billion a day. Securities pledged as collateral, cash received, repaid the next morning and renewed. If lenders refused to renew overnight, the borrower faces an immediate crisis. On Monday, liquidity was adequate. On Tuesday, roughly $2 billion in client outflows began. Counterparties started reducing exposure. On Wednesday, lenders began refusing to accept collateral. The chief executive went on television to reassure markets. The market reaction was to accelerate withdrawals. On Thursday, the firm had $2 billion left, 1 day of cash. The chief executive called the head of the central bank's New York branch and the chief executive of the largest bank. On Friday, the central bank invoked Section 13(3) of its founding act. Unusual and exigent circumstances. A $29 billion bridge loan extended through the largest bank. Over the weekend, that bank conducted due diligence. On Sunday, it offered $2 a share, a 94% discount to the previous week. Employees who had been required to hold their stock and retirement savings in the firm's shares were collectively worth $236 million. At peak, the company had been worth roughly $20 billion. The outrage was immediate. Shareholders threatened to vote the deal down. A week later, the price was raised to $10 a share, while the acquirer simultaneously locked in nearly 40% of the company through newly issued shares to prevent rejection. The deal closed in May. The acquiring bank assumed roughly $1.2 trillion in assets and liabilities. Roughly 6,000 of the 14,000 employees were laid off. The remaining 9,000 to 10,000 were absorbed into the acquirer. The acquiring bank would eventually pay over $5 billion in mortgage-related settlements for liabilities it inherited. But what happened to the toxic assets the central bank absorbed tells a story that rarely gets told. The central bank established a special vehicle to hold the firm's most toxic assets. $28.8 billion from the central bank, $1.15 billion from the acquiring bank as first loss equity. $30 billion total. The asset management firm that managed the portfolio was given a mandate to wind it down over time rather than sell into a panic. By 2012, the central bank's loan was repaid. By 2018, the portfolio was fully liquidated. Net profit to the government, $2.5 billion. The most toxic assets on Wall Street in 2008 were worth more than $30 billion over 10 years. Panic pricing and fundamental value diverged enormously. The former chief executive's personal stake in the firm had been worth roughly $1 billion. It was now worth $61 million. No criminal charges. The $275 million shareholder settlement in 2012 was paid by insurers, not executives. The headquarters building was sold for $1.45 billion. The building was worth more than the company sold for. 6 months later, a competitor was allowed to fail. The official explanation was that the government lacked the authority, but the same emergency power used for this firm was available. Academic research documented that the competitor had $131 billion in viable assets that could have backed an $88 billion loan. A facility like the one that made $2.5 billion could have been created. The decision not to create it was at least partly a choice whose consequences were not fully anticipated. Bear Stearns was the warning. The competitor was the catastrophe. The difference was 6 months and a change in political will. Bear Stearns collapsed because it funded $400 billion in assets through overnight borrowing that could be withdrawn in a day, held massive mortgage exposure while the housing market turned and operated in a regulatory environment where the people whose job it was to catch this identified the problems and did not act. The hedge fund warning came 9 months before the firm-level collapse. The bridge tournament became the symbol. The acquittal of the fund managers closed the door on criminal accountability for an entire crisis. The central bank's emergency facility made a $2.5 billion profit. The toxic assets were not worthless. They were mispriced by a panicking market. The firm's headquarters sold for more than the company. The employees who built the firm over decades absorbed the losses. The executives who ran it were not charged. The insurance companies paid the shareholder settlement. The accountability gap between who made the decisions and who bore the consequences is the defining fact of Bear Stearns and of the crisis it helped trigger. The reforms that followed are real. Capital requirements tripled. Leverage limits prevent the structures that destroyed this firm. Resolution mechanisms exist so that the next failure can be managed rather than chaotic. But the pattern of institutions taking hidden risk in pursuit of short-term profit, regulators seeing the problems and failing to act, and the costs falling on workers and pensioners rather than executives, is not a pattern that regulation alone eliminates. Bear Stearns was the first domino. The question it left behind is whether the system learned enough from the warning to prevent the next one. The honest answer is that the system learned enough to prevent this specific crisis. Whether it learned enough for the next one remains untested. Every choice is a trade-off. At least now you know what you're trading.